Have you ever questioned what truly defines foolishness in a man? Carl Jung, a towering figure in the study of the human psyche, outlined patterns of behavior that expose the essence of ignorance often hidden even from the men who embody it. These behaviors function like silent snares, quietly unraveling relationships, derailing careers, and eroding a man's sense of purpose. What marks a man as truly foolish isn't a lack of intellect. It's his approach to both his internal world and the outer landscape of his life. The most unsettling truth: any of us, regardless of our intelligence, can fall into these unconscious patterns. Let's explore the 7 key indicators Jung identified and consider how they may be active in ourselves or those we know. Sign 1: he reacts before reflecting. In the depths of Jungian psychology, there's a crucial distinction between the wise and the undeveloped, the capacity to pause. The man governed by impulse. The psychologically immature man habitually leaps into action or emotional expression without taking time to process. This isn't simply impatience. It's a core developmental deficiency that leaves chaos in its wake. Instead of engaging thoughtfully when confronted with conflict or change, the reactive man instantly launches into anger, defense, or decision. His nervous system jumps straight from stimulus to action, skipping the reflective pause that defines mature response. Jung saw this as evidence of a weak ego structure where lower instincts override the evolved capacity for discernment. This impulsivity shows up in daily life. In conversations, he talks over others, prioritizing his own rebuttal over real listening. In love, he lashes out over perceived offenses without considering intent. In business, he makes reckless moves based on emotional reflex instead of insight. Such behavior often stems from an unconscious need to avoid discomfort. Instant reactions serve as a protective shield, blocking vulnerability, reflection, or the deeper emotional work required for transformation. He mistakes quick responses for intelligence, when in truth they expose an inability to engage with nuance. Instead of learning from missteps, he rationalizes them or blames others, reinforcing the very habits that keep him stuck. Jung would see this as a tragic misdirection of psychic energy, where the ego resists evolution in favor of false security. Real maturity. Jung taught begins when a man creates space between experience and reaction. This psychological breath allows the unconscious to inform the conscious, integrating deeper intuition with rational analysis. The man who never develops this skill remains mentally adolescent regardless of age or status. The cure: deliberate awareness, practicing stillness in moments of emotional intensity, learning to pause, breathe, and choose, not just react. The man who fails to cultivate this will continually sabotage his potential, unable to access the depth of wisdom available to those who can think before they act. Sign 2: he insists on always being right. A compulsive need to be correct, even in the face of overwhelming contradiction, reveals another form of internal fragility. Jung viewed this rigid attachment to one's perspective as a symptom of an unintegrated ego, a defense against deep-rooted insecurity. For the psychologically immature man, disagreement feels dangerous. He doesn't explore differing ideas with openness. He meets them with resistance. His sense of self has become so entangled with his opinions that opposition triggers an identity crisis. In dialogue, he listens not to understand but to counter. He interrupts, dismisses, and deflects, more invested in dominance than in truth. His confidence is a mask, concealing fear of inadequacy. Jung understood that such defensiveness arises from a fragile self-image, one that cannot absorb critique without collapsing. This need for superiority creates a closed system, a mind incapable of growth. He learns nothing from others because he's too busy preserving the illusion that he already knows it all. Jung described this as a form of arrested consciousness, where the psyche fails to evolve past ego identification. Relationships wilt under this behavior. Friends and loved ones begin to censor themselves, fearing retaliation for disagreement. Over time, only sycophants or the silent remain in his life. This isolation reinforces his illusion of infallibility. In professional life, such inflexibility becomes a liability. Innovation and progress suffer when no one dares to question flawed ideas. Jung would label this the shadow side of leadership, the tyrant archetype overtaking the guide. This condition hides beneath a veneer of confidence. Our culture often mistakes unwavering certainty for strength, but Jung warned that authentic power lies in openness to contradiction. True psychological resilience allows for evolving truths, not rigid dogmas. The path forward requires humility. A mature man views being wrong as a step toward deeper wisdom, not a threat to self-worth. Jung advocated for the tension of opposites, the ability to hold two conflicting truths at once in the pursuit of synthesis and transformation. By recognizing the limits of one's knowledge and remaining teachable, the man begins to dissolve the foolishness that clings to certainty. In this way, the ego transforms from a rigid wall into a vessel for expansion. Sign 3. He refuses to own his mistakes. Jung believed that the willingness to confront and learn from one's missteps is essential to personal growth. The man who avoids this reflection, who consistently shields himself from his own errors, remains psychologically stunted. This isn't mere forgetfulness. It's a deep refusal to acknowledge personal fault, and it becomes a major roadblock to individuation. This type of man remembers every misstep made by others, but conveniently forgets his own. When relationships deteriorate, when projects fail, when goals aren't achieved, he crafts elaborate justifications, placing blame anywhere but on himself. Jung would interpret this as a shadow in full operation, the repressed or denied parts of the psyche being projected outward instead of integrated. The underlying mechanism is psychological inflation, an ego so overextended that it cannot bear the humility of being wrong. To admit a fault in his eyes equals personal failure. The emotional discomfort this would cause is so threatening that he opts for denial, distancing himself from any real self-evaluation. Professionally, this man becomes closed to feedback. Constructive criticism is seen as a personal attack. Negative outcomes are deflected onto clients, colleagues, or market forces. The learning cycle, try, fail, reflect, adjust, breaks down completely. Stagnation sets in while others adapt and grow. In personal relationships, the damage is just as severe. His inability to recognize his role in conflict blocks authentic reconciliation. Apologies, when they occur, are diluted and evasive. "I'm sorry if you felt that way," instead of "I'm sorry for what I did." Jung would view this as a refusal to embrace the anima, the inner feminine that grants emotional honesty and healing. The tragedy deepens over time. Each avoided mistake strengthens the delusion. His self-perception diverges further from how others see him. He constructs a fantasy self-image that bears little resemblance to reality, a myth of infallibility. Spiritually, Jung found this especially dangerous. Without embracing our faults, we cannot harvest the wisdom hidden within them. Jung called this the gold in the shadow. The transformation that happens when we integrate the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. The man who refuses to own his failures forfeits this gold, remaining forever a stranger to his deeper self. To break this cycle, Jung prescribed conscious self-reflection, what he called active imagination. This means stepping outside of one's ego and observing one's actions without defensiveness. It requires the cultivation of an inner witness, one capable of seeing truth without flinching. Therapy and honest relationships can become mirrors to aid this process. The alternative: a life on repeat. The same conflicts, the same disappointments, the same failures, each one passed off as bad luck or other people's fault. Jung would see this as a profound tragedy, a soul trapped by its own unwillingness to look in the mirror. Sign 4, he mistakes pride for courage. In Jung's eyes, one of the most dangerous confusions in the male psyche is the belief that ego-driven pride is the same as true courage. The foolish man consistently conflates the two. He sees his stubbornness, defiance, and refusal to back down as signs of bravery. In truth, they are defenses, ways of preserving a fragile identity at all costs. Authentic courage, as Jung defined it, is the willingness to face inner fears and the unknown. It's the strength to confront pain, uncertainty, and vulnerability head-on. It involves risk, not for show, but for growth. The foolish man avoids all of this. Instead, he builds a rigid armor of pride and calls it strength. He refuses to apologize, believing it would diminish him. He escalates minor conflicts to avoid appearing weak. He holds on to broken beliefs or decisions because changing course feels like surrender. Jung would interpret this as a sign of ego inflation, a self-image so brittle that any admission of error threatens to shatter it. This distorted pride shows up most clearly in how he handles emotional exposure. Vulnerability, a cornerstone of real connection, terrifies him. So he masks it with bravado, silence, or sarcasm. He fears being seen as uncertain or soft, so he performs certainty even when he's lost. At work, this man can't ask for help. He pretends to understand when he doesn't, often making situations worse. His team learns not to rely on his input, knowing it reflects posturing more than truth. Jung would say his persona, the mask worn in society, has overtaken his authentic self. In relationships, his defensiveness suffocates closeness. He interprets challenges as attacks, disagreement as disrespect. The battlefield replaces the bond. Loved ones tire of managing his emotional fragility, and many eventually pull away. Jung traced this behavior back to childhood wounds, moments when softness or uncertainty were punished or mocked. To protect himself, the boy built a wall, but what once served survival becomes a prison in adulthood. To escape, Jung taught the man must undergo an ego death, a letting go of rigid self-definitions. He must realize that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's access to truth, intimacy, and transformation. This process is uncomfortable, but it's also liberating. The wise man knows that true courage often looks like admitting fault, asking for help, or saying, "I don't know." He understands that strength is built not through resistance, but through integration, welcoming all parts of himself, even the tender ones. Jung saw this as the essence of individuation, becoming whole by embracing what we've rejected in ourselves. Sign 5. He avoids silence and self-reflection. How a man relates to silence reveals much about his psychological state. Carl Jung noted that the man who avoids quiet and introspection is not merely active by nature, he is actively fleeing his inner life. This isn't just about disliking stillness. It reflects a deep discomfort with what might surface in those moments of quiet. The foolish man cannot tolerate stillness, neither externally nor internally. He fills every gap in conversation with words, unable to sit with pauses that might invite deeper thought. He interrupts, overspeaks, and races to fill the void, not to express something meaningful, but to keep silence at bay. Jung recognized this as a defense mechanism, a way to avoid the psychic content lying just beneath consciousness. In silence, the truth threatens to surface: unresolved pain, unanswered questions, repressed emotions, so the foolish man hides in noise. In earlier times, this may have meant constant chatter or activity. Today, it often takes the form of endless scrolling, streaming, and digital distraction. In work settings, this manifests as an inability to focus. The man jumps from one task to another, constantly interrupted by his own compulsions. Deep, meaningful work requires mental quietude, something he has never developed. Jung would identify this as a failure of the transcendent function, the psychological process by which opposites are synthesized into wholeness through inner attention. In relationships, his aversion to silence prevents intimacy. Authentic connection often lives in the quiet moments where shared presence replaces performance. But this man can't stay there. His constant noise blocks the attunement needed for genuine bond. Partners may feel unseen, not because he doesn't care, but because his fear of stillness keeps him at a distance. Jung knew that such aversion to quiet usually stems from the fear of what lives in the depths of the unconscious. In the silence, one meets the shadow past traumas, suppressed doubts, unresolved wounds. To the foolish man, this is dangerous terrain, so he never goes there. But in doing so, he also blocks the possibility of healing and transformation. Spiritually, this creates a hollow existence. Jung saw silence as sacred, a necessary womb for wisdom and growth. The man who avoids it deprives himself of the very space where deeper truths are born. His life becomes noisy but shallow. He may talk endlessly about ideas, even about spirituality, but it remains intellectual, never embodied. To change, Jung would suggest facing silence directly, sitting with it, allowing the racing thoughts, the discomfort, the buried grief to rise. This is the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole. Only through sustained attention to one's inner life can meaning emerge. Without it, a man remains fractured, reactive, and disconnected from his truest self. The foolish man thinks silence is emptiness. The wise man knows it is the gateway to selfhood. Sign 6. He avoids anything that challenges him. The ability to engage with ideas or people that contradict your own beliefs is a defining trait of emotional maturity. Jung observed that the foolish man consistently resists this. He recoils from anything that questions his worldview, seeking comfort over growth. This isn't just preference, it's psychological avoidance. Intellectually, he curates an environment where his beliefs are never tested. He reads only what confirms his views, listens only to those who agree, and shuns anything that might disrupt his certainty. Jung would call this an ego defense, an immature structure incapable of holding paradox. When disagreement is unavoidable, his responses are revealing. He attacks the source questions, motives, or mocks rather than engages. Logical fallacies and emotional defensiveness replace real dialogue. Jung would call this a projection of shadow, assigning malice or ignorance to others to avoid confronting his own discomfort. In relationships, this behavior isolates him. He cannot receive feedback without becoming reactive or withdrawn. Honest conversations vanish. Those close to him learn to walk on eggshells or simply stop sharing truths. Depth becomes impossible. Instead, his social world fills with either silence or superficiality. At work, the consequences are just as damaging. He rejects mentorship, ignores constructive criticism, and resists new methods. His skills plateau, his strategies ossify, and his progress stalls. Jung would see this as a refusal of the transcendent function, the psyche's natural drive toward integration and complexity. What makes this especially harmful is the illusion it creates, surrounded only by sameness. The man believes he is wise, but his certainty is born from ignorance, not knowledge. He's not growing, he's hiding. And with each avoidance, his inner world shrinks. The roots of this avoidance often lie in early experiences. Perhaps as a child, he was shamed for being wrong or punished for questioning authority. The result is a psyche that equates challenge with danger, so he avoids anything that might expose him to that old pain. To evolve, Jung would say the man must embrace psychological courage, the bravery to sit with dissonance. Growth doesn't come from safety, it comes from facing what disrupts us, from the tension between who we are and what we don't yet understand. The wise man seeks out such moments. He reads broadly, listens deeply, and welcomes ideas that stretch him. He understands that complexity isn't confusion, it's the raw material of wisdom. Jung would describe this as holding the opposites, the capacity to welcome contradiction and allow it to forge new understanding. To flee from challenge is to flee from growth. The man who does so may seem stable, but he is stuck. The man who engages the difficult, the different, the dissonant, he is becoming whole. Sign 7. He craves approval from people he secretly disdains. Carl Jung offered a powerful insight into a man's psychological integrity by observing from whom he seeks validation. The foolish man in Jung's eyes demonstrates a peculiar contradiction. He longs for the approval of people he doesn't even respect. This isn't simple hypocrisy. It's a sign of deep inner fragmentation. You'll see this pattern in his social interactions. He bends his personality to fit in with those whose values, intelligence, or authenticity he privately criticizes. He laughs at jokes he finds immature. He agrees with opinions he considers wrong. He performs admiration for people he would never trade places with. Jung would view this as a sign of disconnection from one's inner compass. the man has lost touch with his own internal source of worth. At work, the behavior intensifies. The man flatters bosses. He deems incompetent. He competes for recognition from colleagues he secretly ridicules. He may climb social ladders in organizations or communities he despises just to be seen to be approved. But this leaves him hollow. Jung would call this spiritual disintegration the slow erosion of the soul when external validation is valued over inner truth. Social media amplifies this dysfunction. The foolish man meticulously curates his image for an audience whose opinions he would dismiss in real life. He tracks likes, comments, and followers from people he wouldn't invite into his home. Jung described this as the inflation of the persona, the social mask becoming so dominant that it suffocates the real self beneath it. What makes this pattern so dangerous is how it corrodes self-respect. By seeking approval from those he secretly holds in contempt, the man admits without realizing it that he doesn't trust his own judgment. Over time, this builds a feedback loop. His internal authority weakens while his dependence on outside affirmation grows stronger. This pattern often originates in childhood. If love or approval was given conditionally or from figures who were inconsistent, critical, or untrustworthy, the boy learns to chase validation even from sources he doesn't value. What began as emotional survival becomes in adulthood a default orientation that prevents authentic self-worth from forming. Relationships under this pattern tend to be shallow. The man surrounds himself with people who affirm him without challenging him. Those who demand emotional honesty or depth are pushed away. Even if a partner stays, they often sense the underlying inauthenticity, a kind of contempt or disengagement lurking beneath the surface. To evolve, Jung would say the man must reclaim his inner authority. He must develop the courage to evaluate himself based on internal standards rather than external praise. This doesn't mean rejecting feedback. It means only seeking it from those whose character wisdom or integrity he genuinely respects. The wise man aligns his relationships with his values. He seeks mentorship from those he admires, builds friendships with those who challenge him to grow, and offers his truth to those capable of receiving it. Jung would call this psychological congruence a state where the outer life reflects the inner self, enabling authentic transformation. When a man stops chasing empty approval and starts listening to the voice within, something profound shifts. He moves closer to individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole by integrating all parts of the psyche. And from this place, he begins to live with clarity, confidence, and true integrity. Each of the 7 signs Jung identified isn't just a flaw, it's a signal. A warning that the soul is veering off course, losing contact with its purpose. Stupidity in this sense isn't a lack of intelligence. It's a refusal to grow, to reflect, to connect deeply with oneself and others. The man trapped in these patterns doesn't lack potential. He lacks awareness. And awareness is something that can be cultivated through silence, through reflection, through courageous confrontation of the shadow. Jung taught that transformation is possible for anyone willing to engage in the work of the soul. But it requires humility, responsibility, and the bravery to dismantle false strength in favor of real wholeness. The journey begins not with a dramatic act, but with a quiet admission. There's something here I need to face. And in that moment, the foolish man begins to awaken, not into perfection, but into presence, not into superiority, but into sincerity. He steps out of reactivity and into intentionality, out of ego and into essence. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the reclamation of the authentic self from the fragments we've scattered to survive. It's the most challenging journey a man will ever take, and the most rewarding. Because in walking that path, he doesn't just change his life, he becomes a force of transformation for the world around him.